Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, when you see one of those massive industrial projects, a new chemical plant, some huge piece of infrastructure, they just feel impossible.
They do. They look like managed chaos.
Exactly. And today we are going deep into the playbook that the world's largest companies use to actually manage that chaos. We're talking about their contracting and procurement strategy, or CMP.
We're basically pulling back the curtain on the very structured, almost clinical process they use to decide who builds what, when, and critically, under what terms.
And our sources for this, they're not public-facing documents.
No, these are internal workshop materials, report templates. They detail this rigorous multi-stage process that's all designed to define priorities, wrestle incredible risks to the ground, and pick the best possible contract model.
It's not guesswork at all, is it? It's a roadmap. I think you said it's a 4-phase roadmap.
That's right. The sources lay out 4 very logical sequential phases. First up is environment and objectives.
So project framing.
Exactly, setting the goalposts. Second is CMP strategy development, which is where they get into the options. Third, you have CMP tactics, how they go to market.
And finally,
CMP planning. That's where it all gets turned into a detailed execution plan.
okay, let's unpack that starting point then. Project framing. Before a single dollar is committed, you have to define what success even looks like.
And in this world, success isn't some vague mission statement. It's all hard, measurable numbers.
Right.
The documents show they dedicate a ton of time to this, really nailing down the metrics in 5 core areas. The first one is just. It's non-negotiable.
Let me guess, safety.
HSE, health, safety, and environment. The objective is usually stark and simple. No LTI during the project, no lost time incidents, period.
That sets the ethical floor. What about the quality of what they're actually building?
For quality, it's all about adherence to, ISO standards and all the required technical specs. Then you get to the big one, the real pressure point for any capital project.
Schedule.
Schedule. The ultimate metric here is hitting the RFSU milestone.
Ready for startup.
Ready for startup. Because if you miss that date, you are losing millions in delayed revenue every single day.
And then, of course, there's the money.
Of course, cost. The focus is on achieving minimum CapEx capital expenditure. But what really struck me in these sources is that they don't just stop at the construction metrics.
No, they immediately link it all to the plant's future life, its operation.
They absolutely do. They're setting operational targets right from the get-go. Things like specific capacity requirements in tons per day or megawatts.
And how well it runs?
Critically, yes. A high capacity utilization. For example, something like greater than 95% operational availability. It forces the entire team to pick contractors and terms that deliver not just a finished project, but a working, profitable asset.
This whole process sounds like a pressure cooker. The sources talk about an intensive 2-day workshop just for this.
It has to be. I mean, think about it. Day 1 is all about defining the environment, the risks, and developing the core strategy options.
And day 2?
Day 2 is for ruthlessly vetting those options, running market analysis, setting timelines, and building the action plan. The whole thing is designed for rapid consensus to get from these high-level goals to a potential preferred strategy in just 48 hours.
So once they've defined what success is, the very next thing is risk. And a huge one is when you decide to break a colossal project into pieces.
You've hit on the absolute killer, interface risk.
More contracts, more problems.
That is the printable. The sources state it in big, bold letters. More contracts, more interfaces, higher interface management risk.
Yeah.
You might think you're saving money by splitting the work.
But you're creating a management nightmare.
A complete nightmare. And the biggest insight here, I think, is that they actually quantify it. They have a formula for this administrative burden.
Right. They gave us that stunning example from a large industrial plant.
It's incredible. So take a typical chemical plant.
Yeah.
Let's say you have just 2 major contractors working side by side. The calculation for the oversight required is just massive. They estimate 10 interfaces per system times 10 different systems, things like piping, steel, cables.
Right, the basic components.
Times 4 required documents for each interface. That gives you 400 interface points.
400 points of contact. And that's just the start of the workload, isn't it?
That's just the start. Because for each of those 400 points, someone has to manage it. Who's responsible? Who's accountable? So you multiply that by the 3 key roles in a Rasky matrix.
Responsible, accountable, consulted, informed.
Exactly. And the result is 1,200 potential interface management interactions.
Wow. 1,200. That's 1,200 points where things can go wrong. where coordination can fail.
It's 1,200 emails, meetings, arguments, design clashes that exist purely because the project was split. It's pure administrative load.
And that's before a single piece of steel is even erected.
Right, and you have to coordinate those physical pieces.
Mm.
The underground piping from one contractor has to line up perfectly with the structural steel from another. The pipe racks have to be at the right elevation for the above-ground piping. It's an intricate dance.
If EPC 1 is late with the steel, EPC 2 is stuck waiting with the pipes, and that whole 1,200-point chain just grinds to a halt.
That's the risk in a nutshell.
Okay, so that establishes the monumental scale of the risk. How on earth do they select a strategy to manage that and still hit those really aggressive project goals?
Well, it's a very systematic process of elimination and analysis. The workshop team, they'll start by listing out a whole range of potential contracting options.
A long list.
A long list. Option 1 is always the base case, just for comparison. Then, right away, they reject any options that are obviously unsuitable. Too risky, violates a core constraint. It saves a huge amount of time.
And the ones that make the first cut?
Those get subjected to a really rigorous analysis. They use a familiar tool, the SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats.
But I'm guessing it's applied with a lot of discipline here.
Extreme discipline. But the real genius, I think, is how they decide which strategy is best. It comes down to weighting the criteria.
So why not just say, cost is 30%, schedule is 30%, so on? Why do they use this thing called pairwise comparison?
Because fixed percentages can hide a lot of disagreement. Pairwise comparison forces everyone to get on the same page. You take every single one of your key criteria, HSE, schedule, cost, all drawn from those initial objectives.
And you put them in a head-to-head fight.
That is exactly what you do. The team has to sit there and ask, is HSE more important than quality for this specific project? Is cost more important than schedule right now in this market?
By forcing those one-on-one decisions, you end up with a score.
You end up with a relative score for each one, which gives you a scientifically derived weighting percentage. It strips out bias. It makes sure the final decision reflects the agreed priorities, not just the opinion of the most senior person in the room.
So once those weights are locked in, how does that get them to a final choice?
They then score each of the shortlisted contract options against those weighted criteria, usually on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 does not meet the criteria at all and 10 exceeds it to the max.
And that math spits out a winner.
It culminates in a cost value index and a time value index, and then finally an overall ranking. It turns what can be a very subjective, emotional decision into an objective, data-driven recommendation.
Which brings us directly to maybe the most fundamental decision of all, the contract type, the huge trade-off between control and flexibility.
That's the battle between lump sum and cost-reimbursable contracts. These two define how risk is shared, and that defines everything.
Let's start with the one most project owners love, the lump sum LS contract, the fixed price.
The comfort zone, for sure. The contractor agrees to do a defined scope of work for one single stipulated price. But for it to work, for it to actually hold up, there's some very strict prerequisites.
What are they?
3 things. First, the scope has to be defined with surgical precision. No ambiguity. Second, if the company's supplying any materials, they have to be there on time.
As the third.
Minimum scope changes. The minute the owner starts changing their mind, that fixed price becomes a point of argument, not a point of certainty.
The appeal for the owner is so clear, though. You know your cost, the risk feels contained.
Absolutely. The financial risk is low, the cost is locked in, contract management is, well, it's more straightforward. And the contractor has a massive incentive to be efficient. Every dollar they save is a dollar in their pocket.
But the downside is often time, and maybe quality.
The disadvantages can be severe. It takes a long time to get started because you have to define that scope perfectly. That's a huge front-end engineering effort.
And once it's signed, you have less control.
Much less influence. And if you have to make a change, the potential for claims for the contractor to demand more money is just enormous.
Okay, so let's swing that pendulum all the way to the other side. The cost-reimbursable CR contract, or its cousin, the cost plus incentive fee, CPIF.
This is what you choose when speed and flexibility are what really matter, more than just cost certainty.
So how does it work?
The contractor gets paid for all their actual costs, direct and indirect. They're reimbursed. Their profit, their entire margin, comes from an incentive fee.
And they only get that fee if they perform.
Only if they hit agreed-upon milestones. Time, budget, quality, HSE targets. It directly links their bottom line to the owner's strategic goals.
And I saw the documents are really specific about how that fee gets paid out.
Oh, very. They stress that you have to avoid things like percentages for overheads, because that just encourages spending. Instead, if a contractor misses a milestone, that fee payment often gets rolled over.
Keeping them motivated.
Exactly. The biggest part of the fee is usually held back until the very end, until the project is complete, to keep them focused all the way to that RFSU date.
So when is it worth giving up that cost certainty?
It's perfect for two main scenarios. First, for really complex front-end design work where you're still figuring things out. Second, for projects that are extremely time-driven, especially in a buyer's market where good contractors might just refuse to take on the risk of a lump sum.
It lets you start faster.
It lets you start much, much earlier, buying back critical time on the schedule. But the price you pay is risk.
All the risk shifts to the owner.
Almost all of it. The uncertainty in time and cost is borne by the company, and it demands a huge amount of oversight. You need a big team just to monitor and audit their spending, making sure you're only paying for real, justifiable costs.
Okay, so the strategy is set, the contract type is picked, now it's about the final prep, tactics and planning. And step one is pre-qualification.
This is such a critical filter in CMP tactics. You simply cannot afford to let an unqualified company bid on a multi-billion-dollar project.
So you start wide.
You start with a long list of every potential candidate. That gets filtered down through an expression of interest, or EOI.
And the ones that are serious move on.
They get a very detailed pre-qualification questionnaire. Their answers are scored on everything: financial health, past performance, safety, technical skills.
And that gives you your final list of bidders.
It gives you the highly vetted shortlist, and everyone else gets a regret letter. It de-risks the entire tender process before it even begins.
But even with a perfect strategy and a great shortlist, you have to check it against reality. What if the contractors just don't like your deal?
That's why they do market testing. They use what's called a marketability matrix. They look at two things from the contractor's perspective: account attractiveness,
How much do they want to work with you as a client?
right? And second, profit potential. If that matrix shows that good contractors won't make any money or see any value in the project, you have to adjust your terms. Otherwise, you'll get weak bids, or worse, no bids at all.
We talked about schedule being a core driver. How does the strategy handle the really long-term stuff?
The long lead items. This is a huge one.
Yeah.
Think about massive custom compressors or turbines.
Things from an OEM, an original equipment manufacturer.
Exactly, with lead times of 12, 18 months, sometimes longer. To hit that RFSU date, the plan has to include pre-FID commitments.
Which sounds incredibly risky. Pre-FID means you're ordering this hugely expensive equipment before the board has even given the final approval for the project.
It's the ultimate schedule hedge. It means committing maybe hundreds of millions of dollars on the expectation that the project will be approved. It's a massive but essential calculated risk. It's the only way to stop the project from being a year late before it even starts.
And finally, because nothing ever goes perfectly to plan, they have to have a backup.
The last absolutely non-negotiable step is developing fallback options. The team has to identify every single thing that could derail their chosen strategy: a key contractor going bankrupt, a sudden spike in steel prices, and have a concrete, immediate plan to mitigate it. No strategy is complete without a plan B and a plan C.
So when you pull it all together, what does this incredibly structured process tell us about how these giant projects actually get built?
It tells us that success is never an accident. It's the result of relentless, objective, structured analysis. They spend days just quantifying what success means: HSE, cost, schedule. Then they use objective tools like pairwise comparison to make sure every decision aligns with those goals.
And they face the risks head on.
They acknowledge the sheer scale of potential failure, those 1,200 interface interactions. And they use the contract type, whether it's the strict discipline of lump sum or the flexibility of cost-reimbursable, as their primary weapon for managing and allocating that risk.
It really is a masterclass in de-risking ambition. And since a key objective is often to integrate with parallel related projects, that interface risk between, say, EPC 1 and EPC 2 is the absolute core battleground.
Which leads to a final provocative thought for you to consider. Given that managing those interfaces is the most complex administrative burden on a project, how much of that financial risk should the project owner carry themselves? Which means taking on the massive job of managing those 1,200 interactions, versus forcing the contractors to absorb that risk through rigid fixed-price contracts. That strategic choice right there is the central tension this entire CMP strategy is designed to solve.
If you're interested in our contracting strategy templates, then visit our shop. Thanks for watching and hopefully see you next time.